The April 2nd, 2014 Development Commission meeting is now called to order.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Long time no see. It's been a while since I was before you. As you know, as most of you I'm sure know, the city went through a big reorganization about exactly 2 years ago, where we merged the building department, the planning department, some of engineering, and the city's major development review team into one development services department. And out of that reorganization, I got a new position as project oversight manager, where I kind of oversee the entire permitting process. I manage the permit center, and just kind of help applicants be ushered through the various steps of permitting. Also in that reorganization, we got Lucy Sloman, who is a lead planner with the major development review team, who is now the land use manager. She manages the current planners and the engineers in the department, and manages the land use permits. Also here in our audience, as of yesterday, our new director of development services, Charlie Bush, who came to the city a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, as the deputy city administrator, and then just was recently appointed the director of our department, and we're very happy to have him. One of the first big things that Lucy and I primarily were charged with after the reorganization was essentially the merging of how the major development review team used to do things and how the Valley Floor planning department used to do things. And, you know, just melding it, you know, that'd be too easy. You know, we decided we'd come up with a whole new process. And we did that through a couple of what are called Kaizen events or process workshops. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that later. And unfortunately, my new position, it does mean that I won't be presenting too many projects to you anymore. I know, it breaks my heart too. No, I love coming to you guys. And so, you know, our primary reason for wanting to meet this evening is the two reasons primarily. One is to introduce you to our new process, and in particular the parts of it that affect what you all do, but also to take this opportunity to introduce you further to the city's central Issaquah plan. The majority of projects that you'll be reviewing in the coming years will be under the jurisdiction of the central Issaquah plan, starting in a couple of weeks, actually, when we present to you the 7th and Gilman project, or Cadence as it's called. And that's exciting because it's not only is it like the first big central Issaquah plan project, but it's also the first one to go through from the start through our new process. So that's been exciting and challenging, but we look forward to presenting that to you in a couple weeks. So with that, I will introduce Lucy Sloman, who, you know, as we've been sorting through all of this and working all this out, she's been the yin to my yang. She's been invaluable, and I'm sure as you continue to work with her more, you'll be as impressed with her as we are.
Christopher, can I ask a process question?
Yes.
Do you have a preference as to questions, requests for clarification from the commission? When do you want us to wait?
I think this would
through
be
a
pretty
presentation
informal.
to do it, or how, just if we have a question? Okay.
All right. Thank you, Lucy.
So, there we go. So this is a version of the agenda you have in front of you, just so you can kind of see where we are. 3 key parts tonight. The first piece relates to the other handout I gave you, which is talking about permit types and criteria, because there's some changes that are coming out of the Central Issaquah plan that we just want to make you familiar with before you get your first permit. The second one is giving you a kind of general overview of the Central Issaquah standards and approach, so that's familiar. Mel will be giving the detailed call and response. And then the third piece is looking at process. Because, as Christopher said, we have been working for 2 years really trying to meld and streamline some of these pieces. So we're hoping that we can give you some highlights and make it more comfortable and familiar when you get your permit next week. So the first piece, and so you can follow along and also have something to take home, is this other sheet, although what's up on the screen and what's on the sheet are the same thing. There are two main kinds of permits that come to the Development Commission. One is a site development permit, and that's when you're looking at a site plan for, mostly for a piece of property between 3 and 15 acres. However, the Central Issaquah plan changed that, and so if a building has more than 150,000 square feet, it comes to you. So no matter what size piece of property it's on, it would come to the commission. There's also master site plans, which are for 15 acres or more. We're not really going to talk about those a lot today because other than the process, it's staying the same. The kind of things that you would review are going to be the same. It's just that the process is going to be the same as what we'll discuss tonight on site development permits. So in the case of a site development permit, you're the decision maker. With a master site plan, you're recommending to the council. They're both quasi-judicial. I'm not going to go into what that means tonight. On May 6th, Ted Hunter, the city's hearing examiner, is going to come and do a training for all the commissioners. So please feel free to note that on your calendar, but we will be sending out a reminder. And then scope of authority. Generally, you're looking at things like development regulations, design criteria, where that applies. That is not the tool that's used in Central Issaquah. The green sheets, as they're sometimes called. The Central Issaquah replaces the green sheets. And then the approval criteria that have been identified through the city code. And we'll get to that in just a minute. So in general, your processes are different, and the code is different within Central Issaquah. It's the same outside of Central Issaquah. So what are those criteria? The criteria, again, outside of Central Issaquah is the same criteria you've been using all along. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because it is embedded in every staff report, but I think I did want to point out that as I mentioned a moment ago, that when we're dealing with Central Issaquah, you're looking at the Central Issaquah Plan and Standards and any other applicable codes. You know, staff will identify what those are, but the design criteria sheets that you're used to working with aren't used. So that is the end of permit types and criteria. So before I go on to the next piece, are there any questions?
Just as far as the logistics of going through the decision criteria in the Central Issaquah plan, as far as when we get to decision, if we don't use the green sheets that we previously used, will we provided something else that will guide us through the decision making, or we just follow something that's provided as part of the staff report?
It would be in the staff report.
Okay.
There are 17 chapters to the Central Issaquah plan, and well, it's the standards. And those cover things like buildings and site and landscape and a lot of the characteristics that you're used to using from the design criteria sheets. So the staff report will cover each of those chapters and the portions that are relevant to the land use permit.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Lucy, I'm still not quite clear.
Sure.
What will be the mechanism by which the commission records its decision, though, on each application? If it's not the green sheet, I'm just not quite clear on,
Sure.
because that was just a check, go through, discuss.
So you'll receive a staff report.
Right.
It'll be a little different, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but it's basically a staff report. You'll have your discussion of whatever items you think are important. Staff can also encourage you to talk about certain things if we feel that would complete the record. And then we will prepare a notice of decision with the findings, conclusions, and approval conditions that you either decide on or recommend, depending on which kind of permit we're reviewing. And that becomes the record of the commission's decision.
So if, in the unlikely event that there is an application that's come to the commission, everybody involved, the public, the staff, the applicant, go through their respective times of presentations. And if the board, or the commission rather, doesn't have any specific, again, this is unlikely, but we just take a vote then? And, I mean, what's the, to say we approve the application as presented, and if there are any suggestions or amendments, we have to specifically articulate them into the record?
Usually, they would just be on the approval conditions. I mean, if you, well, the record will reflect the minutes, so all the discussion you have.
Right.
It will reflect any public testimony, any comment letters. There'll also be a response, and we'll go into that a little bit, where we collect what staff has heard. You know, and let me just say, if the design criteria sheets are useful to you as kind of like a tickler to make sure that there's certain issues that you're used to bringing up and you want to make sure get discussed, you can absolutely use that as a way of making sure that the kind of topics and areas of concern that have been consistently important to the commission get discussed. But the minutes and the findings and conclusions would be the way we would document that.
Okay. I think what we'll do is, I won't interrupt you anymore. We'll go through the presentations, and then maybe the commission can just discuss and agree on what we think is are the steps that we can take, if there are any additional ones that we need to do. So.
Yeah, and basically, your motions of to approve the recommended conditions or revised conditions or add new ones will be the same as how you've done it before.
Okay. So the next piece we're going to look at is the Central Issaquah Plan. This is composed, we call it the Central Issaquah Plan. Sometimes it's really two components. The Central Issaquah Plan is a policy document, kind of like the comp plan specifically for the area of Central Issaquah. And the other piece are the Central Issaquah Development and Design Standards. So Central Issaquah, just to remind people, if you look at Issaquah in this kind of red circle, the red boundary gives us the general outline of the area that has been rezoned and in which the Central Issaquah standards apply. There are 9 districts within Central Issaquah, and as well as the Raleigh Urban Village and other community facilities. As I mentioned before, any building that has 150,000 or more square feet would come to this commission for review of the entire site, not just the building, but that's the threshold that triggers your review with a site development permit. I just want to clarify terminology a little bit. There's development standards and design standards. The difference, the distinction, I'm going to use some terms that are more familiar to me. They may not be more familiar to you, but I'll explain them just in case. The development standards are standards. The design standards are more like guidelines. So the distinction between that is a development standard is something that's more prescriptive. It's got to be 5 feet wide, it's got to be 7 feet long, it's got to be 10 feet tall. A design standard is more, it's a performance standard. We're describing how it has to perform, but it's not as specific. So an example would be this pedestrian walkway has to be direct. So then we have to have a conversation if we think it's direct or not. And so there's a little more judgment that's called for with the design standards. Tonight I'm going to give you an overview. I'm going to do that with basically 7 slides that touch on 7 different aspects of Central Issaquah. The way we thought about this was kind of a before and an after. The before is really now. It's black and white images of Issaquah. They are just examples of where the city is now. The after is after we've achieved this vision, maybe 30 years down the line. Mel can speak to how long the view potentially is until we achieve this. And so most of the images, not all of them, but most of the color images are from other places. And so the idea is to begin to focus on different aspects so that those kinds of goals of Central Issaquah are more obvious. And I'll start with just an overview of Central Issaquah goals. The goal is to move towards a more urban community. We're really beginning to move away from focusing on cars to focusing on pedestrians. You'll see that in a lot of the slides. I'll identify ways that it can be, these different elements can be more pedestrian oriented. We're trying to create a public realm. I'll define what that is in a minute, but really create places where people want to interact with them that are appealing, encourage them to be out and be outside and join in outside activities. We're trying to balance the mix of uses in the valley. As many of you know, there's not a lot of residential in the valley, and so the goal is to add quite a bit more residential, but not just residential, redeveloping most of the valley, and then also adding uses that you would need on an everyday basis. That's part of making it so that people can bike and walk around, is putting in the uses that people need so they don't have to go long distances to get the things they need. And finally, that we're really attracting all kinds of people who want to live, work, and play in the area. So the first element is the site. So I mentioned the public realm. What is that? The word public doesn't mean ownership. It means sort of how people perceive it. Is it a place that people feel comfortable going into, no matter whether it's owned publicly or privately? And really thinking of what are the things that we put in a public space that make it comfortable and attractive for people to be there. So it's the whole sort of container of that space. It could be buildings, and you can see in these slides, it could be the buildings, the trees, the streets, the walks, the plaza, the roads, all those different pieces. How do they come together and create a space that is comfortable for people? We're hoping that's going to improve the pedestrian experience. And a big part of this is to keep nature in this and respond to the features, the vistas, the character of each individual site. So you see in the upper right-hand slide, that may be taking advantage of a view of a hill at the end. It may mean responding to a high water table. You can't necessarily put underground parking there as much as we would like that. It's really looking at all the different aspects and considering them and integrating them into the site. Second component is green necklace. The idea of the green necklace is to have parks, trails, critical areas, streets, urban spaces with a lot of green in them, and have them connected and create this string that laces through the community so that it is an integral part of our community. You know, Lombardi's, this is the site you'll see in 2 weeks, had the Issaquah Creek right there. That wasn't an integral part of the site. So hopefully we've worked with the applicant, and you will see how that's been integrated and improved as part of the site plan. And when we say this, you know, I mentioned that whole long list. Some of it will be responding, you know, as you see in the upper right, directly having buildings relating, facing onto some of these nice things. It may be putting trails in, but it may, as the lower right photo shows, just simply adding green into the community so that you have a sense of softness. I go ahead and switch to this photo because landscape is such a key part of that. It threads through every single element that we see throughout the community, and it's an integral part of the green necklace. buildings and paving can cover significantly more of the site. So we have the lovely Maple Street building on the left, and it has a more significant setback than you would be able to do in central Issaquah. This completely complies with standards as the city was a few years ago, and now we're moving towards less of a setback, a different kind of landscape, bringing the building closer to the street and really using the landscape to help connect the pedestrians and the buildings, which is a different place than we were a few years ago. Circulation. I think the first thing I want to say about circulation is when we use that, it's not just streets, although of course streets is part of that, because it's not just about moving cars, it's also about moving people. So from the smallest walkway up to the widest street, all of that is part of the circulation system. So we're both trying to ensure that cars can move efficiently and appropriately through the community, but we're trying to think about streets and trails and sidewalks that work well and are pleasant for pedestrians. We want to recognize that they may actually be able to serve a lot of other purposes. People could gather there. You may be able to collect and deal with stormwater through rain gardens. There may be recreation components that be part of circulation systems. So all of that, again, comes back to being one of the key elements of the public realm, and how do we design so that people are attracted to these places. And one of that will be part of the reason that this photo was included is we wouldn't be having tall fences and buildings with their backs turned to the street. It will be important that buildings have a strong relationship to the street instead. Mm-hmm.
Is it, is the ultimate objective to have as a legitimate objective of the CIP to create an environment in which most or 50% of these new residents or the residents of these new structures actually work in Issaquah? Is that a pie in the sky thing, or is it tied to some specific number study?
There's definitely an increase in the number of people who are biking and walking, a significant increase. I think it's up to 17%. And so...
I'm sorry, over what?
I think... I'm just trying to remember the numbers. I believe... Do you know the number? Okay. I believe it's... I don't think I'm going to say because I'm not confident about the number. I believe it's, but the point is to design our community so that it might be working there. It may be walking and taking the bus to where your job is. It may be, if you're a little further away, feeling comfortable enough to bike to where that job is. So Issaquah is definitely, I mean, we've created an economic development department. It's very important to us to provide and create more jobs, retain the jobs we have and create more, and make them really good jobs, you know, that are living wage. And yet we aren't controlling where people live and where people work. So we want that to be an opportunity. We hope that will happen, but we also recognize that that may not be what happens.
Well, it's been pretty well publicized that in Seattle, the urban influx there, a very significant percentage of the people that are moving into those areas don't own cars. I don't know exactly what the percentages are either, but it's significant compared to a couple of years ago. And I assume, and I assume I'm not telling you anything you don't already know, but there's a concern by people who live here already that the simple math of adding a couple hundred residential units to a single site is going to result in that many more cars on the road. And that's what I think is going to what is going to be a pretty persistent issue going forward, which I assume you already know. But that's what we, I think that we need to really understand what the long-term philosophy is with regard to the residential units and the objectives of trying to get more employment opportunities in the town as well, with the objective, as I understand it, to get people to not have to use a car to get from point A to point B. Is that?
And I think that was a really key point that you ended on, was the not have to use their car, is to make it so that there are more choices in the way people can live, as opposed to feeling like the only way that they can actually connect to the places they want to go is by car. Community space, another really key component of this. Often the car was a key piece of accommodating the site plans were really driven by making sure we had enough space for cars. We still have to have enough space for cars. There's still parking standards. There are minimums and maximums to the parking. But moving so that we're site planning for spaces that people can gather in, where they can enjoy. And you can see that we have a residential, a retail, and an office setting currently, and in an office, retail, and residential setting, we're adding those spaces that are organizing elements that are key components of how that site plan was developed. And not only that, we may very well, in some areas of central Issaquah, be adding community spaces either for the district or for the neighborhood. Central Issaquah includes a certain minimum amount of community space for each of those land uses, and that's per project. And then there are maps that have begun to identify certain parts of neighborhoods or districts where they feel it's important to add a park or a plaza that could serve the whole neighborhood. And so those will be potentially on the edge or in a location that makes them accessible to the community. And the project that's coming to you again in next week will include both some of their own community spaces and then a community space for the neighborhood. Parking. As I said, there are still parking standards because we still need our cars. The goal is to provide, reasonable, safe, adequate storage for cars. But we want to think very carefully about where we put those to minimize the presence of them, and to move towards a more urban approach. That would be structured parking. In some cases, that's possible. We're starting to see that in several of the proposals that are coming in now. But we don't expect that that's coming in all circumstances, and there is still surface parking that's part of these projects. So some of the examples you see are where we have a parking lot, we may need to add elements between the sidewalk and the parking lot to sort of provide a street wall, an edge, substitute for there not being a building there. Sometimes it's where we put the parking. In the example you see down here, there's parking on either side, not in front as you see in this example, but on either side of the entry, so it's convenient to people who are coming to these businesses with a large parking lot behind, but as you walk along the street, you're relatively unaware of the parking lot that's behind the buildings. Where we have parking lots, we want to really design them to be more pedestrian friendly. This parking lot has is about the same dimensions as this one. There is a pedestrian path. One of the challenges with painting it is cars tend to park over it, kind of overhang it. It isn't the most comfortable environment for a pedestrian. So we're looking at ways to design the walkways through so they're more pleasant, more comfortable for a pedestrian. And then where we have garages, really look at opportunities such as this green wall that make for a greener, softer, less automobile-oriented face to the pedestrian.
Question, I don't know if you know the answer to this one or not, but in the valley floor, does the water table or geologic condition limit the ability to do below-grade parking? We're going to see more structured parking integrated in instead of below-grade as a result?
I know in some parts of the valley floor, the water table is within 6 feet of the surface. It's relatively high at the project you're going to see. They've used a technique that they think will provide water protection. We'll have a, I'm sure, lively conversation around that. So different projects are looking at it in different ways. Some are putting it underneath, some are putting it in separate structures, some are breaking it into smaller pieces and putting it between or behind buildings. There's several different techniques that we expect to see.
Does the plan encourage a certain kind of outcome with regard to structured parking? What, does it try to push it below grade?
Not so much below grade because of the water table. There's a recognition. I mean, it's very welcome to do that, but there's a recognition that you can't uniformly do that. And where you can do it, you may only be able to go down one level. So there are certain incentives in the Central Issaquah standards that encourage structured parking, but not necessarily under building parking.
Okay, thank you.
And a lot of that comes in the form of limiting the amount of surface parking that's allowed.
No,
I
you
should know this,
should.
but Christopher, since you just mentioned that, my understanding is 70%, 70% of Issaquah, the area that's in CIP and outside Old Town, is asphalt. Is that correct? And remind me what the objective is with this. Is there a net reduction of pervious surface asphalt parking in this area that we now think is 70% paved? Is that?
Well, that's a really interesting point because it is, I think, 70 to 75% parking lots, and they're at the same time we're allowing, you know, is it 40% to 60% pervious that's allowed now, depending on the zoning district that you're in?
It's been a maximum of 65% in much of this Central Issaquah area.
So we're moving up in the urban core of Central Issaquah. It moves up to I think 95% pervious that's allowed. But to really be able, as land values increase, as people desire to be in this area, the objective isn't really to get more surface parking. It's really to encourage more density and a more efficient use of the land, which will likely move us away from surface parking. This is the last slide on Central Issaquah, which is around buildings. As I've mentioned, they're really key to framing the public space and really making a comfortable pedestrian environment, partly because it creates this container and it's more comfortable than being next to something that's completely open. But it's also about just kind of the level of detail, the interest, so the design of the buildings becomes really important. You know, clear windows so you can see what's going on, entrances right off the sidewalk. Sometimes, though, we recognize that there won't be buildings there. And so then, again, this is another example of a feature that could be used to substitute for a street wall where there isn't a building because there's an entry plaza here. Another aspect of Central Issaquah that's kind of interesting is there's even an encouragement that buildings encroach into the right-of-way. What do I mean by that? For instance, balconies might overhang, awnings might hang into the right-of-way. You might have a plaza with an entry plaza with benches, or even sidewalk seating. So the kinds of things that make it an interesting, varied, usable space for pedestrians, we're encouraging those to be in the right-of-way as opposed to pushing buildings back further from the right-of-way just to accommodate those.
Okay, as we set out to establish our new land use permit process, as I mentioned, we held, our department held a couple of different Kaizen events last year. And as I mentioned, Kaizen events are process workshops where you evaluate existing process and find ways to improve them. The first Kaizen event that we had was in June of last year, and that was for our land use permit process. We subsequently had a second one in September where we evaluated our construction permit process as well. But what we're focusing on tonight, of course, is the land use permit process that we came up with. And so the workshop included basically taking, it was 12 to 15 people, putting them in a room for a week, and it was representatives from the different departments and planners and engineers and people from the various disciplines, and basically mapping out our existing process, or in our case, two processes: the existing valley floor process for site development permits, and then the major development review team process for site development permits. So we mapped those out. Kind of took the pieces from both that worked well. We also then eliminated the steps that didn't work so well or were more kind of bureaucratic or didn't add any value to the process. And then we came up with several new ideas as well that we incorporated into the new process. And so this slide here shows what the major steps are. And as you can imagine, there's a lot behind each of those, but I'll just touch on them. We figured out that it was really important to us to get an early collaboration with the potential applicants. The goal of our new process in these Kaizen events was to come two things mostly: to come out with a better product or a better development in the end. And then also be more efficient in our process. Those were the two main goals. And as I mentioned, it was important to start collaborating early with the potential applicants with initial introductions. Our economic development office is involved early on in that aspect of it. And then a series of collaboration meetings. We don't want them to get too far in designing their project until we've had a chance to sit down with them and share our vision, the city's vision of that particular site, and also hear what their vision is for their project, what they hope to achieve, and then essentially synchronize our visions so that it is meeting the overall vision for the city. And so, again, we're finding that early collaboration piece is really helpful, especially as we move into the first real submittal is for a pre-application meeting, and that's when we've had several meetings so far, and but they've started to draw up some real preliminary plans, and that's the first time where we provide them with some real kind of substantive comments on their early plans, and there will likely usually be more than one pre-application meeting. We'll give them our initial comments. They'll go back to the drawing board, incorporate them, and come back, and we'll do another pre-application meeting. And the goal is that by the time they get to the big submittal, the site development permit application, that we're all, we've worked out the big issues, that we're on the same path, and certainly the goal is by the time it gets to you guys for your decision that the project is in good shape. One of the differences that you'll see here from what you have seen before is you don't see a community conference. Typically that would have happened between the pre-app and the site development permit submittal. And Lucy will talk a little bit more of how we're handling that. It's still you know, in the Central Issaquah plan, it's listed as optional. So it's still, you still may see some community conferences if either the applicant wants to get your input and public input early on before they get too much further, or there may be times when we require it if there's some big issue that we need input on before it gets too far. But more often than not, the application will be going straight from the pre-app meetings to the site development permit. It's also important to note that what we're talking about really is Central Issaquah plan in this process. In the rest of the city, the codes haven't changed, so you'll continue to see community conferences, for example, in the rest of the city.
So what we'd like to do is focus on three pieces that we think are particularly relevant to you and describe how for Central Issaquah permits, how those might look a little different than what you've seen before. So the three that we're focusing on are the three in this box, and we're starting with the site development permit submittal. So in terms of how that submittal may look a little different, there's some level of detail differences. You won't really notice that with site plans, parking layout and detail, roads and trails. That will probably all come in at about the same level that you're used to seeing. The places where it will begin to look different are, the first one is landscape. It will be less of a planting plan and more a conceptual plan about the character, the sort of feel of the landscape, and not every single specific plant. So to give you an example, you look at this symbol down here, and if you look at it up on the legend, you can see that in this case, it's a buffer conifer, and there are three different types of trees that have been given example. And we would have an opportunity as staff and you as the commission and the public to say, we think those are great trees on this site for the kind of character. We think those are the wrong trees. They're going to be too big, too small, and we'll have that kind of discussion. But you won't see this symbol is only a rhododendron, and this symbol is only a maple tree. That's a level of detail that we think is better to work out once we've all agreed on the general framework of the permit, and then really get down into the nitty-gritty. Because then they will have heard the kind of comments from both staff, public, and the commission. They also gives them some flexibility when they go out into the market and start looking for the plants. I mean, they know the kind of character of plant, but that doesn't mean it's always available in the quantities they need it when it's time to go plant. The second place where it'll be a little more conceptual is in the details of public space and community space. You'll see a community public space. You'll have a sense of generally how it lays out. Different pieces will be identified, such as chairs and handrails and benches. But it wouldn't be called out as this is going to be a weather vane 75 bench in forest green. We would be more likely to have photos or other things that, again, give a sense of that character. That would be an opportunity for us to say, that a bench doesn't seem appropriate. It seems more appropriate to have movable seating, or there should be picnic tables there. We think that's a more appropriate use of that space. And the third place where you're going to get a somewhat more conceptual plan is around the building. This is what Christopher was referring to a few moments ago about community conference. The level of detail that you're going to see and we're going to be talking about related to buildings is more akin to what you saw at a community conference. We're going to see elevations. We'll see layouts of the building, maybe just for the ground floor, because that tells us what kinds of activities and uses are going to be visible from the streets and trails and sidewalks. We're going to have a sense of how tall the building is, sense of, is this windows, is this blank wall, is this what kind of texture is this wall. We'll have some sense of color, but we won't be down to the final detail of this building is ready to submit for building permit. The goal is to have a really thorough conversation about this project, and then really go away with the applicant once we have that information and have them design to the construction level of detail.
I think I'm on. So I'm trying to be clear about the process then and how it finishes out once you get into building permit. So previously, we had the community conference, provided early input. They went back, the applicant typically would go back, and still will outside the central Issaquah area, but, and do a higher level of detail responding to the comments and direction provided by the commission. They would come back in at the approval point, and we would have material boards, and materials have been selected, the elevations are essentially locked in. So we've got a pretty good idea of what this building has been defined at that point.
Mm-hmm.
So in this particular approach, we'll have the conceptual work completed by the design team and staff, and we will comment on on the concepts, but the detail work would then happen between the applicant and staff as you approach the building permit, so we wouldn't re-engage at any point along.
Yes.
So we're engaging early, but not at the level of detail that we have previously engaged at.
We still expect that there may very well be material boards. So I think the difference is that we're going to hear from you, that seems like the wrong material, this is what we think about the colors, we think there need to be larger windows along the street to really, there's this community room inside there, and we think that there should be a stronger connection between that space and the adjacent sidewalk. And then we'll go away and make that happen with the applicant.
Okay. And I appreciate that, because I think, and I guess we'll have to have a little experience with this first, but that kind of some sense that we've got enough information that we can provide that meaningful input, but obviously not too much, because obviously you're trying to make this a little more fluid and a little bit more kind of staff to design team kind of detailed, dealing with the details. That's fine with me. I guess
Let me jump down and say one thing, a different part of the process that I think will help address
Okay.
a piece, because you're bringing up a great point, Mike. When we get to the Development Commission, let me talk about, because that's changing. It's going to be a little different. We're going to have the staff report. It comes out of about 1 week before the commission meeting. That's what you've come to expect. We're actually going to have 2 meetings with you. So at the first meeting, you will have had the staff report. It will have been on the website. The public will have had a chance to look at it. Staff and applicant will come and make a presentation to you on the project. Public can comment. You can comment. You can say, I don't think those windows are big enough. I don't think that's the right material. I think there needs to be trees there. I think there doesn't need to be trees there. We go away for, say, 2 to 4 weeks and put together responses to the issues, concerns, and comments that we've gotten and come back to you. It's not a full new set of drawings. It's what we call a briefing response memo, in which we have summarized all the issues and concerns we've heard and show you how we plan to address that, whether there needs to be edits to conditions, whether there needs to be new conditions. It gives us a chance also to take all that information that we're hearing and talk to the applicant. One of the challenges that we've found is that if we have one meeting, we're having to write conditions while we're standing up here. We aren't able to talk to the applicant. They're over there saying no. And not that we wouldn't put a condition on there that we felt that we had a basis for if they were unhappy with it, but we would rather collaboratively work together and really get a response that everyone feels is going to be sound and reasonable, and bring that back to you to answer the questions and concerns that we've heard. So you don't necessarily see the project in its full form again, but you do hear not just that we said, yeah, we're going to go talk about this, but yes, we went away and talked about it, and this is the way we'd like to resolve that.
So, Mike,
Just a quick follow-up. So I actually appreciate that, because what I was envisioning is it comes to us initially, one meeting, public comment, right conditions, make decision, move on, and that puts staff and the applicant in a tough spot, because if we decide to go way off into left field on something that may not make sense, or there's a different way to accomplish it, you haven't had a chance to really work that out. So I actually appreciate that. I think that's I like that solution.
Super.
I do too, Lucy. Had exactly the same concern. But so, just a minute, we've got a public meeting and a public hearing. What is it, if we're not going to call it a community conference? I don't want to be tied up with semantics here, but is it essentially the process is the similar one to when we had a community conference and then we had the final meeting?
I'm going to let Christopher answer that, because I did not do community conferences in the urban villages, and I think he has a better sense. I think he'll be able to answer your question better.
Okay, because I really, I personally think that's a key point for us, because the opportunity for us to hear public concerns, hear the staff report, hear the discussion by the applicant, excuse me, and at that stage, and then to make our comments and recommendations and reservations or approve whatever, and then you get a chance to work on it, and then we come back to the public hearing with the approval process.
Yeah.
So when I saw just the one thing down there, I had exactly the same reaction that probably most of my fellow commissioners had too. But
Yeah, I think you're right. The format of that first meeting will be similar to a community conference in the staff presentation, applicant presentation, public comment, and then much discussion between us and amongst yourselves. The biggest difference would be, though, is the level of detail on the staff report, and the fact that staff would have drafted our recommended set of specific conditions for the project.
Well, it seems to me that most of the substantive recommendations that are made by the commission, the individual commissioners, have to do with the appearance, the materials, and the elevations and so on. So frequently, when we did have these meetings regularly, we started getting more and more computer-generated, this is what the building's going to look like, and I believe that most of us thought that was a really good idea, because it was pretty close, but rather than the traditional architectural drawings. Is that going to be required, or are we going to get some will do that and some won't? It just seems to me that gives us a much better idea of what they're proposing at what used to be called the community conference, so we can look at that, as opposed to not too much and I understand what you're doing, but we need to know pretty close what the structure is going to look like, in addition to all the other things, to be able to say, yeah, go for it, or really.
And when you say that, I just want to make sure that we're talking about the same thing. I'm gathering that you're talking about like perspectives, right? And I think we would. I'm not sure right now what our submittal. I don't remember exactly our submittal requirements. We're certainly going to counsel. If we're not requiring them, we're certainly going to counsel the applicant that that's the level of information that the commission needs to be able to make a thoughtful and confident decision. And I think the other thing that's advantageous is when you're talking about a 150,000 square foot building, the architects that are going to be doing that level of building and work and providing, guidance to their clients are going to have, that's the way they work. I can't imagine that you would just get, say, an elevation and a plan.
Well, I don't presume to speak for the whole commission, but as a general thing, it seems to me that when we got those, there was greater appreciation of what the intent was without, as compared to the previous, the other means of presentation.
Well, and frankly, I want you to know that part of the reason we're doing this is not only to give you a sense of how things have changed and make this process more comfortable, we're also interested in hearing what you think you're going to need to make the process work for you. So I think that's great to hear how important those have been, and I think we're going to need to, you know, if that's not a requirement, think pretty seriously about that. And we're also meeting with the applicant who's coming in tomorrow, and they're going to begin talking through what their presentation contains, and we would certainly convey that to them. Although I think based on the materials we've seen, we've already been seeing that, and I would expect that that's the way they would want to present the project to you.
Yeah, knowing the history of projects that you've seen and the level of details that you've seen at all these various stages, I think that the significant point that Lucy made was the fact that what will be coming to you now will be huge projects. I mean, they will be big ones. And I think where we've struggled before was with smaller projects.
So that was about the level of detail. I just wanted to point out a couple of 4 sort of noteworthy changes about the staff report. One thing we're doing is, and maybe it's only noteworthy to us, but the recommendation will be, after you get through sort of the project stats, you know, who's the property owner, who's the architect, how many acres is it, what's the permit number, we will have the recommendation up front. We want you to go into reading the staff report knowing what staff are recommending. We think that'll be helpful to you, just making sense of everything that comes afterwards. Second, we know that with the Doki Do Taco Time project that came to you, we really appreciated the feedback that some of the commissioners gave us on that staff report. We are using the land use code that we're reviewing against, so whether it's the city's land use code or the Central Issaquah, as the structure for the main body of the staff report review. So if it has this section on the site and then this section on parking and then this section on circulation, it'll stay in that order. But where there are those paired pieces, like there's development standards for parking and design standards for parking and then development standards for circulation, and then those were not paired up in the code. So you went through one section and then you went through a bunch of other sections and then you got to the other one on circulation. We're pairing those into one section in the staff report. So we'll go through the standards and then we'll go through the go through the development standards and then the design standards, all in one chapter related to circulation or all in one chapter related to parking, so that you're not having to sort of jump around to get a sense of how that topic is being handled with this project. I think another thing that's important is, and this is a change that we're making. Neither the planning department nor the major development review team did this before. We've tried it on an urban village project. We think it worked pretty well. We're going to bring it to you, and I know you'll give us feedback on how you think it worked. At the end of the staff report are the land use conditions. So these are the conditions that are generated by planning kinds of things. Is there an issue with setbacks? Is there an issue with a land use? Is there an issue with the density, with the height, the kinds of things that are land use things? But there are a lot of construction details and implications that we see in those plans that used to end up in the staff report. We may mention those in the staff report to make sure that the applicant is aware of them, but the conditions related to those will be in a separate attached document. Part of the value of that is they can take that document and use that to transition from the land use permit that they are hoping they're going to get approval for to developing all the construction documents that they have to prepare. So, you know, we'll get little tiny details sometimes from some departments. Those are important to capture and convey to the applicant, but they're really not part of a land use permit. You don't need to read about them. They'll be in the construction document, construction condition document if you're the kind of person that likes to read those. We're not trying to hide them from anyone, But if you're not really interested in that, you won't have to wade through all of that while you're going through the land use permit. And the fourth change is around public comment. We are going to provide a summary of all the comments that we've received and responses to all the comments that we've received. That may be in the staff report, or it may be a separate attached document. We're still talking about that some. We're not thinking that we're going to give you every single letter that we've received. It's public information. We're not trying to hide it, but we're thinking that most people are going to be more interested in what are people talking about and what are their concerns and how does staff respond to these concerns? How have they been responded to in the staff report?
So will there be a percentage given? We've received 15 letters, 10% of them had to do with traffic or design standards, or how will we know what criteria city staff is using to reflect public concern and or comment?
So, first of all, thank you for asking that question. We will provide a list of everyone who has commented, because we want you to have a sense that we got 12 letters and they're from these people. They're parties of record. It's good to put them in the document so that that is part of that official document. I hadn't really thought about, and that's why we're talking about it with you tonight. I hadn't really thought about it in terms of a percentage. Usually what we find is the really hot button topics. If it's around traffic, let's say, a summary of the concerns is going to be rather long because people come at that from a lot of different ways. We're not going to just say traffic was a big concern. We're going to say there were questions about whether there needed to be a signal and whether there's going to be so much traffic on this road that people won't be able to get out and that there needs to be an additional entrance. It's going to be that kind of summary, not everybody's talking about traffic. Does that help?
Yeah. No, it's a good point, though. If we say we've got 12 letters and here's what was said and here's our responses, it would be important for you to know whether all 12 people said the same thing or whether this particular comment just one person said. There's got to be some way to convey that.
I'm sorry, it's a personal thing, but transparency is so fundamental to me for public trust in the process that I just want to make sure that it's going to be that somebody that has a concern is going to be able, that doesn't come to the meeting or watch it on television, is going to be able to find out pretty easily what the public response comment was without going through a huge bureaucratic process to, file a Freedom of Information Act or
Sure.
something like that. So.
Sure. No, it's a great question, and I think Christopher and I will go back and talk about how we could give a sense of that sort of weight that we've seen through the letters.
Well, it'll help us too.
Yeah. Well, I mean, absolutely. The point is to help you, but I mean, you're providing us with a great pointer that we just need to go spend some time.
I think you need to be real careful sometimes, because the fact is, if you get 12 letters and everybody mentions the same thing, it's not a vote necessarily in that dialogue or that effort to make an assessment of what the public interest is. But sometimes people will rally other people and say, I can't stand XYZ, and so you'll get 50 letters, everybody mentions it, but they all mention the same thing. So I think it's clearly more important to really capture the essence of the comment as opposed to necessarily the number. That has value, but not nearly as much as the essence of the comment.
Oh, I agree, Richard. I wasn't really talking about a specific 12 letters on traffic. I just wanted to make sure that it's not difficult for us or a member of the public to understand that of the 12 letters that came in, or we got 15 comments, and to get some granularity of what the comments were, if they were all the same thing. I mean, we deal with that kind of thing in the past, so yeah, it's just.
Well, and I think, here's the thing. That's part of why we're having this discussion tonight. We're going to go back and tweak what we're doing. You're going to get a staff report. and you're going to say, this worked, this didn't work. When we get the briefing response memo, we want to see a copy of every letter. And if that's what we need to do, we'll provide a copy of every letter. We're going to be we're going to be tweaking this process. We're not trying to say this is done and we're done. So I think the important thing is that we're looking for your feedback and letting us know if it's working or not working. We also recognize that different people read and get information out of things differently. So we're just really need to hear that from you.
Mr. Chair?
Yes,
Can
go
I
ahead.
just jump in? Because over the years, I've always found the comments and letters that I see in staff reports is very useful, but I can understand in big projects, there might be a lot of them. A couple things is, one is I think that people need to have that feeling that if I send a letter in, and I can't make it to a meeting, but I send a letter in, that my letter is going to go to the people that are making the decision at some point, and not somebody just summarizing what my letter meant and maybe misconstruing it. But I can understand not wanting to have a staff report that's got 100 pages of letters if it's really long. But at the same time, it seems, I presume you store all these electronically, and could it just be provided as a separate electronic file to all the commission members saying, here's the staff report, here's all the letters.
Talked about that.
That was one of the options that we were
PDF file, and
considering. So
if you want to read through them, go ahead, here's our summary.
You just like a link to where the letters are?
A link, or just send it as a file.
Right, that there, you might have the staff report. I mean, often you get one kind of big file, and we could just have a separate file that represents all the materials that we sent you, and then we could also attach a file of the letters.
Can you, where in this does the notification go up? That, the white signs, the letters to the neighbors, saying this is a proposed land use change?
Right, that really, would you say?
It's the same.
It's the same.
Yeah, notice of application goes out within 30 days of the application being submitted.
Yeah.
The proposed land use action sign goes up during that same time. So the public is notified when the application comes in. Then they're notified again at least 2 weeks prior to the public hearing.
Okay, because we had some friction at the last couple of development commission meetings that we had with people saying that they didn't get notification, they didn't know about the community conference meeting. I don't know how much of that you got back. So we talked a little bit about taking a look at the notification process to make sure that people did understand there was a community conference, there was an opportunity to talk to somebody ahead of time on an individual basis or whatever they wanted to do. I think that was pretty clear, because we had, I think, 2 out of 3 of the last community conferences that we had people here that were kind of upset because they said they heard about it from a neighbor or that kind of thing.
Okay. All right. No, I was just going to say, that's great feedback, and we'll just need to make sure that our process is working.
I just have a quick comment about the response to comments. I know that with EISs, they'll sometimes include the letters electronically, like you suggested, and then just in a spreadsheet or something, label each letter with the response that the city staff writes that corresponds to the letter. So letter A might be referred to Common Response 1, which is written in response to 10 to 20 of the letters addressing the same traffic issue. So that could be a way to do what you're talking about, write 10 common responses and then link them somehow to the letters, so that if a community member wants to look at their letter, they can see how it was responded to specifically.
So we're not writing individual letters back to each person
No, I
who writes the
understand.
letter? Okay.
No.
I mean, they will be
An idea.
one of the things we are doing is acknowledging, if we, especially because most of them come in as emails, we send an email back, your comments have been received, and we'll respond to it within the staff report. Because we do want the thing that you're suggesting is a common response, so
Yes.
that everyone is getting sort of the same information, and we're not slightly contradicting or confusing things by sending out multiple responses.
And you're still, in effect, addressing each letter that came
Okay.
in.
I see.
So,
Okay. That's really the end of the presentation. I'm a little out of order, but we've really covered all the materials that Christopher and I intended to go through. Do you have anything you want to add?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. Anything you guys would like to add?
Maybe just a quick comment?
Go ahead.
So, and I think, Lucy, you mentioned this just a few minutes ago about, you take your best shot at trying to, refine the process, make it more efficient, but maintain its effectiveness as we go through all of this. But clearly, anytime you do something like this, it's never perfect. So the idea that we'll experience it a little bit, I think it's be important that as we're doing that, we make a little bit of time to provide some feedback. Say, here's what worked, and here's where I think we could maybe try something different that might be more effective. So maybe as we're going through, the first one here, coming quick, but then, the first several that we do under the new process in the central Issaquah area, that might be pretty helpful, I think, for staff and even for us to, check in with each other on what's working, what's not in the new process. I appreciate what you're doing, though, trying to make this more efficient, more predictable for the applicants, and also trying to squeeze down the time, because time is so important. So good effort on trying to find a better way to do this, and we'll see how it goes.
Thank you.
Yeah, it seems to me that you're really on the right track in thinking more in the context of not as much more conceptual presentation than specific, because you can real quickly get caught up in the whether it ought to be green or brick or however you might want to do, and the listening to the comments and what people's really concerns are gives the developer more opportunity to be able to adjust to the comments, as opposed to spend a whole lot of time arguing about a specific design decision that may or may not already have been made. So I think that's real smart.
would the commission just be involved in the first public meeting and then the second public meeting? And the responses that staff prepares, will they be emailed to us, or is that a presentation? Number
Thanks.
two.
I kind of jumped down to the key piece, and I didn't really talk through that, so thanks for reminding me of that. The first meeting, we're showing on here that it's a public meeting. It may end up being a public hearing, and that we continue the public hearing to the second night. We're still talking through some of the, implications of that. The basic structure and kind of information at each of those meetings we're planning on sticking with as it's shown here. We take all of that, we prepare the briefing response memo. The briefing response memo has, again, kind of bundles of comments we've heard bundled into topics. We have a staff response, an applicant response, and a conclusion. So the conclusion may be, we feel that we've covered it in our comments, we've clarified whatever it needed to be. It may be a new condition, an edited condition. It may be providing additional diagrams or plans or something, that a photo that clarifies or corrects what we've heard. At the public hearing, we come back and we present all of that. So we have the applicant and the staff go through each of those topics and talk through that with the commission. Then we would take public testimony, and the commission would have a chance to talk through it, ask questions, and make their decision. Does that answer your question?
So the response is not presented to the commission?
Oh, thank you. No, you would get it just like the staff report. It would be sent out at least a week before the meeting, so commissioners all have a chance to consider the information, and then we would meet in a week later and have a discussion about it.
I guess I would, back to the initial part of the green sheet and the checklist. I don't know if it has to be as detailed as the green sheets, but I always found useful to have some kind of checklist when you've gone through a long hearing or public meeting to go back and then step through and walk yourself through all the 17 items that have been covered. So if you did come up with something, I think it would still be helpful.
Because I know you used that then to go back and where you wanted to add conditions or change conditions.
Yeah, I agree with Mel. I'm a little bit, this sounds a little bit amorphous for decision-making. I mean, if we don't, I don't, it's not Dumbo's feather. I mean, I don't have to have a green sheet, but I do agree that, especially with big things like this, there are a lot of specific decisions and a lot of specific issues. And it may be something of a challenge to keep all those perspectives and responses and things in order, basically. So I would agree with Mel. I don't know if it's maybe not a green sheet, but something that's going to help us recognize and not miss anything.
Right. So I'm.
We don't need to decide it now.
No, and I'm just at a little bit of a disadvantage because I've never used the green sheets.
Mm-hmm.
And this is, if it's anything, it's not the same, but it's more similar to what we've been doing with the urban villages. So all I can say is it's been working for those commissioners, but that does not mean that we don't need to develop a tool to support you. I think one of the things, though, that we've found, that's part, I think, of the value for staff and commissioners in doing that briefing response memo, because we really go through every single thing. Even, you know, when we did Grand Ridge Plaza, people were talking about traffic at Grand Ridge Elementary, which is, you know, a half a mile away and has nothing to do with it. And yet we had a brief response on that because that was something that came up from the public, and we felt that we needed to provide a brief response to it. Even though it wasn't necessary, didn't really have bearing on the decision that the commission need to make. So I'm hoping that that memo may serve in some way as that, but if it's not, then what we're going to need to do is develop a different tool that helps you work through the criteria and the elements that you need to decide, and you'll, I'm sure, let us know that.
I know exactly what you guys are saying. And we are going to have to figure out whether the briefing response memo addresses that, or whether, like Lucy said, we'll need to come up with another document.
Mr. Chair, I'd also like to say, having worked for a long time on the Central Issaquah Plan Task Force, that I thought Lucy did an excellent job extolling the visions and ideas and goals of the plan itself. So thank you.
Well, thank you. I'm still learning it myself, so I appreciate that.
Great.
Are there any further comments from you folks? Any other comments?
Just wondering, Christopher, if I don't recall getting copied on the Issaquah plan, the Central Issaquah plan.
Oh, receiving an actual copy of it?
Uh-huh.
It's online.
Okay.
How do you feel about that?
I'm okay with that, I suppose. If we
So I think the city website, it's a little buried, so we'll provide,
send a link out to us so we can get to it, that'd be great. Then-
Yeah.
So we can go through it. I mean, we were involved along the way as it was being developed, not at the level that Commissioner Morgan was involved, but at different points along the way, so we're somewhat familiar with it, but it would be nice to see how it's all mapped out in the code itself.
absolutely. And I appreciate that reminder, because I know with the urban villages, we gave out the first development agreement, which is about 3 inches thick, and then after a while, we started relying on that, and it's important to make it easy for you to find the codes that you're reviewing for, so that's.
And we will expect you to cram on it in the next 2 weeks. You got 2 weeks.
Well, I
So
was,
just to make it clear from me, the number 3, the public hearing, the commission action there will be a vote to approve the site permit or the master site plan as presented, as amended, as has been the case before. Even though this is the Central Issaquah plan, it's going to be the same parliamentary process that.
Absolutely, it's Robert's Rules of Order. What we've usually done is prepared a motion that captures all, the staff report, the materials that have been submitted, the briefing response memo, and we also leave room for edits to conditions. We recognize those come up as we're going through it, and then directs the staff to work with the chairperson to prepare the finding, conclusion, and conditions that make up the notice of decision.
Okay.
But that's all within Robert's Rules of Order.
I would, along the lines of a copy of the central, I've read the plan online. I'm old school, and so having a hard copy, it has real value because I annotate and do that kind of thing that's not nearly so easy online. Are there hard copies available that we can either purchase or get?
I think we can make one available.
Like maybe when we send out the link to everyone, you could respond with, may I please have a
Great,
hard
I'd love,
copy?
okay,
Yeah.
great.
Anything further?
And please mark your calendars for that May 6th event. We will be sending out a reminder, but just to let you know.
And that is, again, the May 6th event is the first,
With the hearing examiner for the kind of legal training.
I'm not going to be here.
It's fine.
I just would like to thank you for doing this. I mean, we've talked for a long time, we've talked about having formal education sessions for the commission on a couple of different things. So this is, as far as I'm concerned, this is a real good step to take to keep us up to snuff. And I'd also like to thank my fellow commissioners for coming here tonight and taking advantage of this. It was, from my perspective, really well done. To record comments by a member of the public.
Hi, my name's Connie Marsh, and I have a store at 1175 Northwest Gilman Boulevard and also live on Squawk Mountain. So I go to a lot of these meetings, so I came down to give my comments on what I like and don't like about a bunch of the processes. One of the things that I think that we're going to need to have in the Central Issaquah Plan is to be sure that we show a large amount of area around each project so that we can understand how it is connected to the rest of the Central Issaquah area. I do like the idea that you all talked about green sheets. It gives you a way to make sure that you are checking off each topic with the thoroughness that you would like to see and not being entirely dependent upon staff. One thing that I don't know if you know about the Central Issaquah Plan is it starts out with some sort of high-level goals and then it sort of comes down in scale, and only some of those actually have teeth. There's a lot of the Central Issaquah Plan that was sort of put into place that was to create an idea of what we want to have but didn't necessarily require it. And so that, I think, is something that's going to be sort of hard to understand, how to get something done when you can see no visible teeth. We were assured at that point that we would be able to get there without requiring it, though I think that's a good thing to do when you read the Central Issaquah Plan, and hopefully they give you the entire structure, not just the guidelines and the standards, the whole goal-setting stuff. One of the examples that you might find with the difficulty of getting something is where they've lined out where they want larger parks. They haven't really stated exactly where, so none of the landowners really know if it's going to be them or how they're going to get it or how that's going to happen. So that just sort of exemplifies some of the difficulties that you might be thinking of. The other thing that they did not bring up is the visibility to the public, which was very important to me. And online, there's a list of all of these projects, large and small, that are going through. You're only going to get the really big ones. And so this list online is supposed to have everything and everything that's happening on it so the public can actually see what is happening at a given period of time. And in the end, there's supposed to be a push out so that you guys could keep an eye on that too, so you can get an idea of large and small projects. Just because you have some expertise, I'd like to see you at least know that that exists in life. Lucy said there was higher impervious surface, but one of the complexities of the Central Issaquah Plan is there's some trade-offs for the higher impervious surface. We're supposed to have larger buffers and more streetscaping. And so the caution of how to balance it all holistically, I think, is important, rather than per parcel. You have to look at how much green we're getting all over the area incrementally. And I don't know how that's going to be tracked over time. There's a planned action ordinance that says a little bit how that's going to be tracked, but I'm hoping that that could be a part of your review also, to see how we're moving incrementally in the process. The public sometimes has difficulty in understanding how to ask for a condition. You've seen this in the Development Commission too. So it would be nice to think of a way to make it easier to ask for a condition that could make it better, because sometimes that's the hardest thing, is how do I phrase this to make a condition? It might sound like whining, but I want a condition. And how do you go from whining to a condition if you think it's important? Not that I would whine. No. Okay, that's it. Thank you for listening.
Are there any other further comments by members of the commission?
That's just very helpful.
Yes, I did too. Thank you, Connie. All right. If there are no further comments by the commission, we will adjourn the meeting.